There is a lack of understanding of the Great War from the perspective of the Middle East in Western scholarship.
As you'll know, Faisal, from your trips around Europe, there's an obsession with the First World War.
In the book, you've called it somebody else's war from the perspective of the Arabs.
I think that's very much the way people in the Arab world feel. They were drawn into the war by the Ottoman Empire. The Arabs were an integral part of that empire. And they'd been serving in Ottoman uniform for centuries before the First World War. But given this was the war when the Ottomans are defeated and ultimately fall, there was no sense of the attachment to the Ottomans implicating the Arabs in that war. As soon as the war was done, no sooner had they come to terms with the tragedy of what they'd been through, the Arabs found themselves in an imperial situation. And suddenly, all of Arab history has shifted towards the struggle against imperialism. Somewhere along the line, in Arab countries that had been central, like Palestine, Syria, Egypt, the First World War has fallen out.
One of the aspects of the First World War, which I think still has resonance today with the wars of the region, is the way that some of the actors in the wars of the Middle East then had different motives. So they are on the same battlefield, but they were there for totally different reasons. I wonder if you can talk a bit about why and how that was the case in 1914, and then maybe we can talk about whether that's the case in Iraq and Syria today.
The critical thing about the Ottoman front was that nobody expected to go to war against Turkey in 1914. There was no animosity or hatred of the Turks to match, let's say, what the British and French propagandists had trained their societies to hate the Germans. They called them the Boche. But the Turks didn't inspire the same degree of anger or hatred, and in a sense, as Anzac troops, Indian troops, French troops, British troops flood the Eastern Mediterranean in a bid to achieve a quick victory over the Turks, knock one of the Central Powers out, maybe link up with Russia through the Black Sea. They did so thinking it would be a quick war, a quick victory, a morale booster, but not because they had real grounds to go to war with the Turks. And the shoe was on the other foot for the Ottomans. They had no real reason to hate or want war with Britain and France. They were drawn into a conflict not of their making, and they found themselves defending their territory on many fronts all at once. They did so valiantly. They fought a fine war, a war that, I think, surprised all their enemies. But here again, they did not have any anger or hatred of Indians, Australians, New Zealanders, to match the violence of the war they were fighting. And so I think everybody felt as though they were thrown into a conflict that no one had expected, on a front no one had considered, to fight people they had no grievance against, but all were driven forward by the commands of their generals, and these were wars that both sides saw had to be fought to a successful conclusion. In this way, the Ottoman front was live for 4 full years.
You humanize these parts of the world that are often, particularly in the West, not often seen collectively, in very collective terms. So you draw a distinction between the soldiers and the politicians that sent them to fight, which is not often something that is drawn. That distinction is often drawn with Western countries, but not drawn with the other countries.
In writing The Fall of the Ottomans, I really privileged the diaries and memoirs of Ottoman and Arab soldiers who were in the conflict, alongside those of French, British, and Anzac troops. But I think by reading the experiences firsthand of soldiers who served, you're suddenly made to realize that this war felt very much the same from both sides of the trenches. They all shared the same fears. They suffered the same conditions. It's very hard to separate the Ottoman Mehmedchik from the British Tommy when life in the trenches went on for month after month.